everyone. This is about to start. Thank you for showing up. So in-person meetups are finally back. Thanks to Postman, Joy especially for giving us this beautiful space to the community to hang out and discuss APIs finally in person. So we have a lineup ready of two very interesting talks regarding developer experience. There are some folks joining on our live stream as well. So if you can hear us, if you don't hear us correctly, just drop a message and we'll figure something out. For our first talk is by Adil. Adil and I go way back. I know him from more than a decade ago when he was doing his PhD in APIs back from University of Auckland, New Zealand. And in fact, it was his PhD thesis that basically became API-matic, and now there's a developer experience platform coming out of a research thesis. So without further ado, Adil, please come in and tell us about APIs.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today, joining us today. Special thanks to Postman, Joyce, to you, because we were trying to get a space to host this meetup, but everything was like so difficult to arrange in this era. And so special thanks for opening up this beautiful space for us. Okay. So thanks Amir for the introduction. What defines the success criteria of your API? So this topic first came in my mind when I visited a bank in Europe a few years ago. So they had launched an API portal I think 2 or 3 months ago, and I was meeting the team who launched the portal. And I asked the question, how many developers are using your API? And the answer was an awkward silence. And I said, okay, if it is like less than 1,000 developers, it's fine, it's new. And they said, yeah, it's less than 1,000 developers, it's still ramping up. And when I came back, and I tried that portal by myself, I tried to use the API. After spending half of the day, I could not make my first API call. All the security hops, all the certifications was so difficult to tackle with. And it made me think that this team does not have the KPI of getting developers. Their task was to release the API. What if after a year, their bosses ask about the ROI? If you have invested so much amount in building this API, releasing it, how many people are using it? What's the ROI? And that made me think, there should be a success criteria which developers or the team who are designing API, building it, they should be thinking about while they're releasing it. So that will never work. Anybody knows here about this title? Yeah. So that's okay. What reminds you of this red box? Netflix. Yeah, exactly. So this is the title of a book by the founder and first CEO of Netflix, Mark Rudolph. And it's a very interesting story how Netflix first began. But the more interesting I found is the concept of the chapters which are in the book. They are focused around the launch of their first launch. For example, chapter 1, January 1997, 15 months before launch. Chapter 2, spring 97, 1 year before launch. And there are more chapters like 6 months before launch, 1 day before launch, on the launch day, and what happens after the launch. Why I found it so interesting? Because it reminded me of my first launch. Like the build-up, the excitement, the anticipation, the expectation with my first launch. And I am sure that you can also realize the same thing, the same excitement. And this happens with every launch. Whenever I release a new version of the API, so I'm sure you also think how many people are coming to it. Is the press set? Everything is set. So imagine I release my API. What happens in the first hour? What I'll be thinking about? What happens on the first day? Imagine you have released an API. What will you be thinking about at the end of the day one? What will you be anticipating? Anyone?
Still loading. Still working.
It's still working? Yeah, it's still not broken. We were basically thinking about the signups. How many people have joined me? Who are the people using my API at the end of the first day? And the second day, and the third day, imagine after 1 week. The first week, now signups are there, the focus is there, but the next focus goes on. Okay, people are coming up, they're using my API, but how are they using it? What kind of apps they are building? Where are they integrating my API? So, and this is true for not only API, but for any product. For example, I had a big obsession about our signups, and day and night I used to use a tool, Mixpanel. Mixpanel is one of my favorite tools because every single sign up, every single interaction. So my obsession was about the failures. Anybody is having any failure, I was there to just see and check. Okay. So now, if there are these two criteria, for example, who are using my API? Of course, those are developers. And how and where are they using it? That we termed as integrations. So if we start measuring those, then at some point of time, we would be able to see the success of our API. So when I was building this graph, another criteria, another factor came in my mind as revenue. Okay, if my API is doing good, how much revenue is it bringing? But revenue is actually an outcome of growth. So if you are hitting your growth target, then of course you are building something great, and of course revenue will follow. So now let's move back and focus on the first audience, who are developers. Developers are our target audience here. So I'm going to show you a very interesting infogram. Developers, who we think they are? A nerd that's sitting in front of a laptop just doing coding day and night. But who they actually are. So the point is, while we consider developers important and everything, we miss the diversity, the beautiful diversity in terms of languages we have among the developer communities. And if you want your API to be successful with developer communities, we need to think about the needs and requirements of those communities. How are they going to use my API when they are looking at an IDE in front of them? How can I help them? But interesting fact is that with the advent of no-code and low-code platforms and tools like Zapier and Eft, the API audience has moved beyond the traditional developers. Now, as a product manager, as a marketing person, I can also interact with APIs. For example, if I have published content and somebody tweets about it, I get a Slack message. So APIs are being called, but I'm not a developer. I'm in marketing who's getting benefit from this API interaction. So that takes us to an interesting fact that beyond developers, there are people who are consuming your APIs. And what are those people? So this is a diagram which I modified from an article, which is, the link is here, the business case for developer experience, written by Keith Casey, who is an advisor and a good friend. So I modified this and compressed into four parts, 4 layers of our audience. On top, there are 10x developers, who are super developers, who think differently. There are not a lot in the world, very few, but they see everything differently. Then there are mainstream developers, developers that we see every day who are proficient in few languages, who are trying to connect different software systems together. Then there are framework developers, and there are people with little or no development skills. Okay, so what are their use cases? The 10x developers and mainstream developers, they have the whole API at their disposal. They can take different use cases, build around different apps using the API. There's no limitation on what they want to do with the API. If you come down to framework developers are, they are more familiar with their particular framework. For example, if I am working in React, I am more happy to use React components. I don't go big in some big language programming concepts or just particular language, but if you provide me something as a React component, I am happy to paste into my React application. So the point here is the use case. If you have an API, so for the mainstream developers, the whole API is available, but for the later layers, the use cases are limited. Framework developers, for example, if I am providing, for example, a payment capability in my WordPress website, I will be only using 2 endpoints maybe, which is helping with the payments, or a React component, which is helping with the payment. And if I come down, for the people who have little or no development skills, I can simply be using maybe 1 endpoint, just a trigger. So to make them successful, what components do they need? For 10x developers, they are self-sufficient. They have their own framework, they have their own libraries. So if you provide API reference docs, that's enough for them. They are good with it. And if you come down to mainstream developers who are, working with so many softwares, they don't have a particular choice of a framework or a favorite library. All they're looking forward to, if you can provide, for example, your API encapsulated as a library in a language they like to code in, they are much more happy to consume that and build an app using that library. So SDKs and code samples are the components if you want to target those mainstream developers. Then the framework developers, as I discussed earlier, plugins and widgets. Provide to them and they will be quickly up and running with your API. And for the last layer, low-code and no-code components and triggers. If you have Zapier, Zap, just give it to them. They will be using your API using those. Now, providing the components to developers, that's one thing. The real problems comes up when you try to maintain everything. For example, you have updated your API and your components are outdated. Your plugin does not match with your API which is implemented. What happens then? So I've also added a layer of maintainability. So if you look at over here, the API reference docs, they can be generated via API specification. It's a no-brainer nowadays. It's very easy to do it. And you come down, you can see SDKs and code samples. They can also be generated via API specification. It's a different topic that how difficult are these to generate those SDKs and to maintain them. But if you have figured out that bit, you can easily generate those via API spec. Come down for framework devs. Now, since they are representing a few small use cases, then you have to manually make those components. Just take your whole API and pick up a few use cases, add some business logic, and then make this component. Similarly, no-code, low-code connectors, if you're working on those, you have to manually create those. So this has presented a very interesting opportunity. I was reading an article that Zapier, the 5 billion unbundling opportunity. And just read this. The increase of underserved Zapier customers presents an opportunity. That means manually creating those interactions, those zaps, those plugins is becoming so hard that it's not maintainable, and there are more players coming up to solve this problem. So I just wanted to show the impact of this thing. Now, imagine as an API owner, what you want to do. If you want to target all these 4 layers, what are your options? So I can give you a suggestion. For example, you can start with API reference and docs. You can get it from an open API specification. And if you can provide SDKs and code samples, then you would be able to cover the big developer community who are looking to integrate your API to their applications. Now, coming to here, what if I want to use these help framework devs and other ones? For them, if you have figured out SDKs and code samples, then your API is in the position to speak these languages, and these widgets, these low-code, no-code components are language specific. They are not language agnostic. So with the help of these SDKs and code samples, you can reduce the time of manual development, and somehow you can build those semi-automatically. So if you are able to figure out, again, API reference log, SDK and code samples, you have a way to semi-automatically provide those smaller components, but again, there is no solution at the moment to automatically generate these kind of components, since it requires business logic and they are very use case specific. So enough for developers. Now, let's move towards integration. And that's about how and where is your API used. So imagine 20 years ago, whenever a business, we said that for a successful business, you need to have a website. Okay? Now we say for a successful business, you need to have an application. Because my consumers are using smartwatches, they are using different platforms. So the problem is, we as businesses want to support all these platforms which our consumers use. And APIs address this diversity beautifully by helping create ones and apply to all the platforms who are going to consume those APIs. So the scenario is this. We have over 50 million developers in the world, and your API is trying to help those developers to build applications for different platforms. So how can we start? Let's start with small. Imagine, let's start with only 1 million developers. While I was making this slide, I was thinking about the 20 million developers, which are, which Postman right now has at their platform. 20 million, that's an insane number. That's crazy. So kudos to Postman for having this big community. Imagine, we want to support as a success KPI only 1 million developers in the entire lifetime of our API. How we are going to do it? So we want to just dig a bit deeper and see the total development effort required for the integrations. So over there you can see there are 3 types of development efforts required if you are working with APIs. The first one is the API development itself, which as an API owner is the responsibility of your team. On the left, you can see app development, which is the business logic, which is the design of your application. And at the bottom, you can see the integration logic. Integration logic, what it does, it just connects your API with the application. It does not add any intelligence, but it's basically the communication layer between the 2 layers. So if we go in detail, what does this integration look like? So imagine this little pirate is the one who is writing integration code for my API. So starting with an API reference, there is a still long path to cover. The configurations need to be taken care of. There are call arguments, authentication bit is there, especially if you're dealing with banking or fintech APIs. This is a huge bit to cover. And then checks and validation, encode, input, and the big list. Now, every developer who is trying to consume your API will have to go through all these hops. And if this little pirate takes 1 week to integrate, to follow all these steps, what was our target? To reach out to? 1 million developers. 1 million developers to start small with. So if one developer is taking 1 week, then a million developer would take a million weeks. Almost 19,178 years. Isn't this number crazy? So, and this integration sometimes is not, this code can be taken care of. And while I was working on this, I was thinking that who is basically making money with this integration code? Because the API owner is not making any money with this. Because they are so focused on building their API. The app developers, integration is not their goal. Their goal is to build an application. So who is making this money? So we talk to a lot of enterprises, and we often ask this question, that, okay, you want to integrate this API, how are you going to do it? And the typical answer is third-party software vendors. And if I want to, for example, integrate Boku API, and I'm a bank, What I will do, I'll simply go to a third-party software vendor and ask them, okay, integrate this API. And how long does it take? It typically 6 months, sometimes 1 year, and the cost is never under 6 figures. So this kind of integration is a problem for the ecosystem. And now you can imagine how busy are developers, how expensive they are getting every day, because there is a lot of work they are doing. So as a solution, the unicorns of API space, I'm sure you all know Twilio, you all know Stripe. But if you know Algolia and Contentful, they're also new unicorns of the API space. How they have tackled this problem of integration? How are they saving time and of developers and increasing those integrations? I wanted to have a look. So I went to the portal of Contentful and I found a list of platforms which hold all client libraries, tutorials, demos, sample applications. You can see a list of languages they are supporting. Similarly, I went to Algolia. Algolia got a list of platforms and languages, but look at this. This says that we strongly recommend using our official API clients, libraries, and integrations. Why? Because with the experience, they exactly know that if you are following those integration code which is already built in, the user will be able to save a lot of time and effort. So in summary, what they have done, they are doing two things here. Number one, they are speaking the language of their developers. And number two, they are providing pre-built integration code so that they don't have to just do all the dirty work, and the integration code will speed up their app development. So by doing so, what they are doing, they are just like straightening up the path from API reference to the first hello world. It saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of effort. And the impact, I want to share a statistics from one of our customers, Brightly. Why explain that? Yeah. So Brightly, which was commonly, which was previously known as Your Solution, we asked like how much time you're saving with the help of client libraries. And the stat they gave me were insane. They said that we used to take 1 week to release our new version after every update, but now that 1 week has been reduced to 18 seconds. So all the integration time which was manually done has been reduced, it will compress so much. So we wanted to run the same experiment with other companies. So recently we saw that Forbes released a list of Cloud 100 companies, and I saw a great article by Postman as well. So we wanted to analyze how those companies are doing it. So the work is still in progress, it's not complete yet, but these are our initial findings, that the companies who have made to the Forbes 100 cloud companies, they are taking care of both the things which you mentioned. They are providing components that makes integration easier. For example, SDKs, dev outreach, API reference, client out, all the things are there. And the number of languages they are supporting. And you can see Plate, Scribe, Intercom, all the good companies with massive developer traction are there in the top quadrant. So, time for some conclusions. So we started with measuring or defining a success criteria for API. And what we figured out, there are two main factors to look at. Number one, who are the developers who are trying to use my API? And number two, how and where they are using it. And what we found, that the companies who are achieving this growth, they are doing two things. Number one is speaking their developers' language, and number two, providing pre-built code for integration. So if you are thinking about the success criteria of your API, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's not in terms of developers or integration, but these two have proven successful for a lot of companies. So please consider these two factors when you are thinking about an API strategy. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
All right. So if there are any questions, please. Yeah. Are there any questions from the audience?
You can take questions right now or after Sugham's talk.
Maybe we can do that too. So Thank you, Vadim. So now we have an interesting talk by Ashish from ThoughtSpot. So Ashish is a distinguished developer from ThoughtSpot whose job is to look after the developer persona at ThoughtSpot, looking after the APIs and embedding and SDKs. So over to you, Ashish.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Cool. So, hey folks, thanks Amir, thanks Adil for that informative talk. You'll see some of what Adil talked about in slides as well. So, as Amir said, I work at ThoughtSpot, and I work on a product called ThoughtSpot Everywhere. I'll tell more about what ThoughtSpot does and what ThoughtSpot Everywhere is about. So ThoughtSpot is a data visualization tool. These are some of our customers, and these are our partners, or basically data warehouses we connect to. And basically, you could run your visualizations or your analytics on top of these databases. You just get analytics out of it and answer your questions. So how are we different from Tableau, Looker, Power BI? All these are competitors. Basically, we are the only ones in the market to have a search interface. So, like you could do like something like top 5 customers by savings in Boston and you get a chart out of it. So basically, you just type your search query and you get a visualization. So on the back end, this results in a very complex SQL, but the user does not need to care about that SQL. They just type their search query and they get the results. Now, how is this helpful in today's world? So today's data is everywhere, right? You go to, you use Strava, you just see your stats. You use Apple Watch, you see your stats. So what ThoughtSpot wants to be is the place where you get all the facts. So if someone is building Strava, they don't need to build their own charts. They don't need to build their own analytics. They can just use ThoughtSpot and power their analytics. So that's where ThoughtSpot Everywhere comes in. ThoughtSpot Everywhere is a tool where you could embed search and AI-driven analytics into your own app. Now, be it Strava or like we have tons of customers. Strava is not one of them yet, but a lot of our customers are just using ThoughtSpot to power their own visualization and analytics. So like sports basement, this is just a sample thing. You can just have your own app, and then ThoughtSpot just integrates inside your own app, inside your app to give power analytics for you. So what we have built is a JavaScript SDK with React components. We also expose APIs for folks to just consume like ThoughtSpot modeling and do their queries using an API interface. We also expose a ThoughtSpot modeling language to just define data models on top of your database. And all this is powered by the ThoughtSpot platform. Of course, like ThoughtSpot platform itself has like tons of Fortune 100 customers. It's built for scale and speed. So all this is powered by that on the background. So what makes ThoughtSpot Everywhere different? So we have live analytics, which is basically ThoughtSpot. That's what ThoughtSpot brings in. We have things called custom actions, but what I really want to focus on today is dev experience. So what makes ThoughtSpot Everywhere different is its dev experience, and I'll go over some of the things which we learned and which we found out were best practices having a good dev experience. So these are some more details into the ThoughtSpot platform itself. So basically, using the ThoughtSpot SDK, people are able to build apps. Actually, it's the other way around. People already have apps. They just use ThoughtSpot SDK to build analytics into their existing apps. Most of the times, that's what people are doing. And this is all like the ThoughtSpot layer. Like these are layers of the ThoughtSpot platform itself. I'll not go into details there. So there are two ThoughtSpot SDKs we have right now. We have a visual embed SDK, which is to embed ThoughtSpot's visual components. Adil talked about React components, so we have exposed native JavaScript as well as React components. Basically, you could embed ThoughtSpot search, you could embed ThoughtSpot dashboards, you could embed ThoughtSpot visualizations, or you could just embed the whole ThoughtSpot app into your own application as well. So all that is made possible using a visual embed SDK. And then we also have a REST API SDK, which is a more flexible and more powerful way to embed ThoughtSpot. And basically, you just call ThoughtSpot APIs, and then you are basically building your own charts. You just use ThoughtSpot to get your data or to do a search query and get the analytics out and get the results out of it. So REST API SDK is where we use API mapping today. All our APIs are basically GraphQL, and I'll go over why we use GraphQL, and then we convert all our GraphQL APIs to REST APIs using a third-party tool called Sofa. I have put the GitHub links, so both of these SDKs are open source. Actually, there is not a single REST API SDK, there is a collection of REST API SDKs as Adil talked about for each language: Python, TypeScript, Java, .NET, and those are generated using API Matic. The visual embed SDK is something which we have built by ourselves because there is no tool in the market which can generate visual embed SDKs right now, and where I see there's an opportunity. Both of these are open source, and you could go over and check them out. So what makes a good SDK DX? These are some of the things which we learned is what makes a good SDK. It has an intuitive and structured API interface. It should be easy to bootstrap or initialize, and the authentication piece, which is included as a part of the initialization, as Adil talked about, right? Like if you have an auth piece which takes a week to just set up, then you have lost the cause, you've lost that developer. So easy bootstrap is a very important piece in this whole puzzle. It needs to have a live developer playground, because otherwise it's just pictures, and then it's just hard for a developer to get their hands dirty and build trust into your SDK. Needs to have good documentation, goes without saying. No performance overhead. I mean, if your SDK is adding performance overhead to the app which is using it, then they will perhaps not use it. And supports most end user platform, and Matic does a good job there. But now these are what we feel make a good SDK DX, but the title of this talk was SDK for enterprise. So what makes a good SDK DX for an enterprise? So when it comes to enterprise, those things are good, but in addition to that, we also need this. It has to have a good versioning scheme. It needs to be backward compatible. You cannot just release things and break what you released, break what someone might be using from 2 months ago. It needs to have a good distribution model. I'll go into details about each of these things here. It needs to be secure, and size. Like when it comes to client SDK, size also plays a huge part. It should be well tested, low regressions, and it should be able to provide escape hatches. I'll go into each of these in detail, and some of the third-party tools we use to achieve each of them. So let's start with intuitive and structured API methods. So I talked about GraphQL, and we use GraphQL for all our internal as well as external APIs. We expose a single graph for ThoughtSpot, and that graph is converted to, for external use cases, this graph is converted to REST API methods using a tool called SOFA. And basically, this REST API method is nothing but an open API spec, which we can feed into API-matic, and that generates all the SDKs for us. So one takeaway for designing very structured and intuitive API methods is deep versus shallow interfaces. So this is one of the principles of programming, but it really becomes more important when designing APIs. Is your API should be deep rather than shallow. Like you have a small interface which should do a lot rather than you having a wide interface which is doing less. So a small example of this is, like, let's say you want to expose a trigger event, a trigger method for events. You could, and let's say you have multiple events you want to expose to the user which could be triggered. You could do event or trigger, and then the parameter could be the event name and payload. Or I've also seen this pattern sometimes out in some SDK where they expose a method for each event whenever a new event is introduced. So this is something what I call as an anti-pattern, and this goes into the shallow module things, because then this API footprint becomes large, and each of those APIs just does a small thing. Whereas in the case of trigger, it's the API footprint is just trigger, and a developer just needs to know about trigger, and they know that they can just feed in the event name there. This also makes it easily backward compatible, because your method name is the same. You're not introducing new methods which can break type safety as you use it. One other thing we learned was like throwing exceptions on unintended usage. So a lot of times what we saw was our developers, like developers who are using our SDKs, they were using our SDKs in an unintended way. I can maybe give you an example. Let's see if I have it here. Yeah, so wait, I'll go into a bit of code here. Sorry about that. If you are not, it's like 6 p.m. in the evening and you don't want to read code, that's perfectly all right. But I'll give you a small example, and it will be clear. So if you, we have a trusted token auth scheme which we expose in ThoughtSpot SDK. So there is this thing called this is an init method, right? So I talked about easy init. So we expose an init method where you can just initialize the SDK. Now it like takes in like, okay, what kind of authentication you are using, what's your host name or stuff like that, and what's the endpoint for authentication, some parameters which you need to fill out, right? There was this method called getAuthToken. Now this getAuthToken, what it needs to do is it should call an API and resolve a user token for this user. Now we made it clear in the documentation that, hey, whenever getAuthToken is called by the SDK, it needs to resolve a new token. But no developers read the documentation, or even if they read it, they did not think about it. What they did is something like this. I will just resolve it with a token. And if you call it again, it will be the same token which is resolved every time. And what happens, the token expiry is like 5 minutes. So if you're after 30 minutes, if the SDK wants to re-authenticate the user, they'll get a stale token and your authentication fails. So what do we do in such a scenario, right? So what we did then is, like, whenever, now in our SDK we do a check that whenever we call getAuthToken, if the token we receive is the same as the last token we got, we throw an error. We just throw a modal. We just open a modal in the face of the developer that, hey, you're using a stale token. So basically, these are the things where, like, when you're building an SDK, you should, if you're able to detect these unintended usages, you should throw an error. And that error should be as loud and clear as it can be. Moving ahead, live code playground. So we should, any good SDK should expose a live code playground where they could play with the APIs. This is just a GIF of API Matic which I took out. So we use API Matic to build a playground for our REST APIs. I'll also want to show so this is our playground for API Matic, where we have all these endpoints, and then we could just select whatever language you want, and then it just you could play with the parameters and try out the API. This is for the REST APIs. We also have a playground for our Visual Embedded Sdk, where you could just basically select what type of embed you want to do. Suppose you want to do a search embed, and then we also give you some knobs here. So basically, this is what we call data panel in ThoughtSpot. So we expose an API that if you want to embed search, you could collapse this data panel. So if I click here, you see what happened here? If I click there, it just wrote that line of code which is supposed to do that, and then I can run it. I can just click run, and it just collapse this thing there. So now if a developer wants to use this code, they could just copy paste this code into their own app, and they would be good. So this just taught the developer how to use these APIs and how to just embed ThoughtSpot into their own apps easily because of a live playground. So what Adil talked about, that how many users are using my API and how many users were successful using my API is a big metric. If the users are not successful using my API, then it's a lost cause. So that's one of the tenets for whatever we are doing here. Moving ahead, documentation. So there are two takeaways here. We should have a way to auto-generate docs from code. So today we can write comments on top of our code methods, and that gets converted into a documentation site. And there should be auto-completion when you are actually using the SDK. So with the Visual Embedded Sdk, we use TypeScript. So TypeScript provides all these types, so we are able to create auto-completions. As the user is typing, as the user is using our SDK in their IDEs, they're able to get these auto-completions to just ease their development. So there are a few tools we use: MDX, ASCII docs. All our documentation is in ASCII docs. We use API Matic to generate documentation for REST APIs. We use Gatsby and Vercel to create a documentation site. We use TypeDoc, this thing of converting code comments, JS doc comments to documentation is done by TypeDoc. And Algolia, Adil talked about Algolia. They are I think they are a pretty cool product where you could just integrate search into any portal you need, and it's like really easy to use. Low performance overhead. I feel SDKs are like a relay race because if your app is this guy, your SDK is this guy, because when you're running the app, at some point in time you pass the baton to the SDK that, hey, do this stuff for me, right? And if this guy is slow, you lose the race. So your SDKs cannot be slow, period. This is also one of the hardest to test and maintain because there are no good tools to continuously evaluate performance. There are profilers which you run on demand, but there are no tools which can do this as a part of your CI. Some profiler tools we use are React Profiler, Node Profiler, JProfile, and cProfile for backend Java and C++. Platform support, we should support all languages. Now there is no good solution for clients. For server, we have Java, Python, all these languages. You can make an SDK. You can write an open API spec, and your SDK is also built in these languages. But when it comes to web, there is nothing. Like we had to hand code React components which wrapped our native JavaScript. We haven't still done Vue, and maybe we'll do it in the future. So if there was a tool which could auto-generate React, Vue, Svelte, there are 100 different JavaScript frameworks. If there was a tool which could generate that, that would be awesome. And I don't know if API is trying to delve into that soon or not, but yeah, that is our ask. Yeah. Versioning and backward compatibility. So I feel this is one of the most important things when it comes to exposing APIs. If you update, you will update your service to newer version, let's say 1.1, but your consumer might be using older clients. Your older clients need to continue to work with your newer API server. So what constitutes a breaking change? If you remove a field from the response, it's a breaking change. If you change an optional request field to be mandatory, it's a breaking change. If you add a new mandatory request field, it's a breaking change. If you change the default value of a request field, it's a breaking. Only these 4 changes are breaking changes. If you take care of these 4 things, you'll not have breaking changes. Which, when first I read this, it just blew my mind that I just need to take care of all these 4 things and I will not have breaking changes. But this is actually hard to do in practice. There are tools out there, and that's one reason we use GraphQL, because GraphQL provides a lot of tooling in this area where given API 1 and API 2, API interface 1 and API interface 2, the tooling can just detect that, hey, this API 2 is backward incompatible with API interface 1. So that has really helped us. We need to also define API lifecycle policy, which we just did at ThoughtSpot, where it is a 3-stage process where we announce deprecation, then we announce end of maintenance date, and then end of support date. And it should come with a sunset response header field, which was really interesting because what this does is when you're calling an API and it is already deprecated, it will come back with a header for sunset date. And the clients could use that header to inform the user that, hey, this API which you're using is actually deprecated and might be removed soon. So, and then there is this version tags we use. So in all our documentation, we always provide a version field that this API is available starting version 1.11.0. So all our API endpoints need to have these version tags because we have single documentation, but our clients could be using different versions. And when they start, they just go ahead and try to use an API and it's not available, and they complain, hey, your documentation says it's available, but I cannot use it. So that's a version thing. Distribution model. We should always distribute our SDKs using package managers. I've seen people say, hey, download the SDK from here. Never works. No one downloads your SDK. When you use a package manager, your SDK is within the development workflow of a developer. As a developer, whenever you see a developer, if they're using JavaScript, they use NPM. These are the package managers for these languages. And today's tooling is well integrated and well-oiled machinery with these package managers already integrated. I can just go into my IDE and with single clicks install packages from these package managers. So if you ask your users to download the SDK, they will not have a clue how to use the SDK, even if they download it. So a lot of friction is taken away by just using package managers. They also provide versioning capabilities here that you can publish different versions of your package, right? Like you can publish a beta version, an alpha version. We do it all the time. We always have an alpha channel of our SDKs, which we use for our internal development, and also we could give it to a customer that, hey, you reported this bug, could you try out this version? And they can easily, rather than giving them a zip file with the SDK. Hey, this is a zip file for this SDK, why don't you try it? It will be not maintainable at all. So we talked a bit about Bootstrap in it. So one takeaway here was split the SDK usage into explicit initialization and the SDK usage. So I showed you that init method, so that's our initialization, and once you initialize the SDK, you can use it anywhere in your application, assuming it's already there. It takes care of the authentication piece in that init part. So make the security setup easy. I would want to show you one thing which we did here. So in our ThoughtSpot portal, we expose the security settings screen, where these 5 settings are what you need to configure. And if you go into edit here, we just these are well documented here, and we say what can go here, and what sort of regexes can go here. This is, I think, still I feel this is one of the highest friction point in our SDK consumption, because people don't get security. Not everyday developer doesn't know about content security policies. Everyday developer doesn't know about course. Forget everyday developer. If I were to come back after 10 days, I'll forget what course was, because these things are so complex, right? So every time I'm reading about course, I have to start from scratch and see, oh, course is on the destination header. It just flips my mind every time. So that's why we try to make that easy for our users. So if you click on this link, we give we try to give we try to give good examples of what can go into each of these settings, how can you configure it. We go over each of these examples which you might want to use. We saw that folks really struggled with adding this stuff, and it resulted in support calls for us. One more thing I want to talk about is third-party cookies. So third-party cookies is something which is increasingly being not supported by browsers now. It's blocked by default on Safari. So one thing which we are trying to find out is a cookie-less auth system, which we could build. So today, cookie-less auth is still experimental. Not anyone does it, but that is something we would want to do. Even on API Matic, we wanted to do cookie-based authentication. But API Matic is right now token-based. But yeah, that's a separate topic. Cool. So size is one more thing here. So for clients, when your SDK is being shipped with the app and the browser needs to open the app, it loads the SDK along with the app. So if your SDK is like 5 megabytes, then and your browser and the app of the consumer is 2 megabytes, then it will be like just defeats the purpose, right? So we use this tool called Bundlophobia, and I would encourage all of you to try it. You can just put the name of your package here, and it tells you what will be the size of this SDK. So these are 2 SDKs which we use today, like hotspot SDKs. So our SDKs are like 28 KB gzip and 38 KB gzip. These are the download times which will be there, and then this is the decomposition of what is there in the SDK, which is making up that payload. So for example, API Matic consumes around 13% of our SDK footprint, what we ship to the client. And here is where I want to make a difference. So if you see this mix panel, it's too small for you guys right now, but this is mix panel. So mix panel occupies 64% of our SDK. The mix panel client itself is 64% of our client-side SDK, which is crazy. I mean, what does it do? It just sends a request to mix panel server, and why does it need like more than half of my SDK size? Like I have written all my code within this, and they have just like what they need to do is just make an API call, and they are like 65% of my SDK, which is really bad. But I mean, we are stuck with mix panel for better or worse right now. Testing and regressions, we use like Jest to do like a code coverage on our thing. One thing which we do is just put these badges on our GitHub, just to show that, hey, like just to showcase that this is a good quality SDK. So we have 93% code coverage, and like this is the size. This is the size of the SDK. So if you are building an SDK and you're exposing it to the public, putting these badges on your GitHub really helps showcase that the SDK is of good quality. Provide escape hatches. This one is a bit interesting. Basically, if you expose an API from the SDK, sometimes what happens is a user asks for some internal details from the SDK which may not be available to the user. So if we expose some of these internals either via private API or just hidden, you don't need to document these, but just exposing some of these internals sometimes help when you are working with a customer or when you're working with a developer who's trying to use the SDK. So one thing was, like, if you think in terms of REST APIs, capability to send additional headers on any API, right? If you have this, just build this capability in your SDK that you can send any additional headers to any API, then it will just help. Like if you haven't exposed this right now, but you might want to expose this tomorrow, but today you can just unblock someone to just add this header. Similarly, adding flags to an embedded component. So the way we expose our embedded components today are iframes. So these are iframes which are just embedding a part of ThoughtSpot. So the way we interact with, or the way we pass payload to the iframe is via URL parameters. So what we have provided is a way to add any random parameter to the embedded iframe, so that even if we haven't exposed that API as a first-class citizen, it can still be used by someone. So this is like a bit of a rare special use case, but I've seen that it really helps sometimes dealing with developers. All right, I think I'm done. That was all. Thanks a lot, folks. It was nice chatting with you. Any questions?
Deck available?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we can definitely share it afterwards.
okay.
If
Yeah,
you are
yeah.
registered on the Meetup, then we'll definitely get in touch and send it over.
Cool. More question for me for Adil? We also.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you release a new version of API, can you describe steps of SDK preparation?
Yes. So it depends what we are trying to release. So if I talk about API SDK, first part is just GraphQL inspector. So every new version of our API is basically a new GraphQL graph versus an old GraphQL graph. So the first step is to just do a compatibility check of the new GraphQL graph against the old GraphQL graph, that this is compatible or not. If there are any breaking changes, we don't allow you to publish the new version, because then older clients will take. So that's first part, and the second part is then we convert that GraphQL graph to an open API spec, and that open API spec gets consumed by API Matic, and then API Matic converts it into it generates code for different languages, and then we take that code in different languages, push it to our GitHub repository, which is the SDK GitHub repository, and then we publish each of those languages to their respective package managers on the same on a minor increment in most cases, because a minor increment is non-breaking. So we haven't done a major increment yet because we have been able to maintain backward compatibility for the most part. So yeah, that's the overall scheme of things, how it happens.
Bob, you had a question?
Yeah,
I'll come up.
I was just going to say, this could be for either one of you. Have you done any analysis, or do you have any opinions on usage or governance models in terms of things like what's the optimal rate limiting, or is there a point where you get into a paid usage? Is there trends or some optimal level that you've discovered that makes sense, especially if the API is part of your core product?
Yeah.
As well, is there any
Yeah.
thoughts?
So I feel the way we handle it is by pricing. So our pricing model is API usage based. So the more you use the API, the more you pay. So in terms of rate limiting, I mean, we don't need to rate limit if we want to.
There are volume discounts, I'm trying to see.
Yeah, volume discounts are there.
We
Yeah.
saw a lot of the analysis. Is there an industry-wide, consensus about what are the right models when it comes to that seem to work well versus others that just get in your way? That's kind of some of the things I'm thinking about.
Yeah. So from what I've seen in the industry right now,
Do you think yours is right?
Sorry?
Do you think the one that you're doing?
I mean, if you see the cloud providers, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, if you go and check their pricing, it's all usage based. Number of API calls you make, you just pay like $1 per 1,000 calls, with first 1,000 calls being free. That, at least in what I have seen the industry, most of them are priced this way. I mean, you might have more.
There's some trends in SaaS applications on that also. The old package deals are going away in favor of usage-based pricing.
Yeah, and it ties into your own success, right? If you, let's say I sell you software for 50K, right? But then it becomes shelfware, you're not using it. Then you just paid 50K for nothing, right? In comparison, if I just say, hey, you get my software for free, just pay me whatever you use, right? For like $1 for 10 APIs, right? 10 API calls. So that way it's a win-win situation, right? Like I have an incentive to make a product which is used more, and you are only paying for what you use.
Thanks, Ashish. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Yeah. They're, I understand, on-demand models versus software models. Just specifically in the API space to drive adoption, is there some place where free better converts to paid? Is that further along? Or should you start charging right off the bat? It's a tenth of a penny every time you call it. And that's the best model, you know.
I think
Does anybody
it's-
know yet?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's pretty much dependent on the use case and your goals at the moment. If you're trying to drive adoption as of now, the idea would be to, focus on getting people onboarding faster. Maybe have a freemium tier to get them adopted first before you start charging. Maybe, for example, WhatsApp just launched their cloud API a couple of weeks ago, and right now that's where the goal is, adoption. And ultimately, of course, they're going to drive to sort of a pricing tiers where they can start monetizing it as well. So I think it depends what your goals are and where you are at your life cycle at the moment.
Yeah, sometimes there's a revenue opportunity further downstream that you want to drive a free adoption and all that. But I'd love to see some of that same analysis that you had early on, but more around the business models than the technical adoption. I think that would be useful to me.
Chris, you had a question?
I have 3 questions.
Awesome. Good luck.
So I'll just ask all 3 and then you can decide to ask them. So I saw the number 50 million developers worldwide. Just a few years ago, according to Evans, it was like 23 million. So it's like, where does that number come from? Or is that with no-code, low-code developers, or has it just exploded? The second and third question is probably towards you more. I was kind of intrigued, like we have one set of documentation and we document, depreciation and introduction of this. And what do you do when things go away, or when you make a breaking change then, for example? Like, how do you manage to have one set of documentation, because I love that idea, of course, and
yeah, so I feel, I mean, I did not have an example for deprecations because we haven't done a lot of deprecations yet, but it would go in the same documentation that this is available from this version, and now it's if it is deprecated, then we'll just put a deprecated tag also. So dsdoc, typedoc is what we use. It provides a deprecated tag as well, so you could put deprecations there. So that's just a documentation piece. But I feel where it really is, what really is important when it comes to deprecations is when you are actually using the API, you message the developer that, hey, what you're using is deprecated, because you would never go to the once you know how to use the API, you would not go to documentation again and again that, hey, I'm using this API today, is it deprecated today? No, right? So when you are using it, it's at that point we should message that this is deprecated. So that is doable via sunset headers. So the REST API spec recently introduced sunset headers. So as a response header of any API call, you can send a sunset header.
So sunset header is some kind of standard that other tools understand, and
yes.
Okay.
So it's a API. It's in the REST API spec. So you can it's a standard header which you can send as a response, and the sunset is the key is the name of the header, and the value would be the date, and then when it will get when it will go away, or when it will be sunset. Now I don't think if a lot of clients read that yet, but a good SDK, if you're building your own SDK, you should be able to read the sunset headers and show appropriate messaging to your developers.
Okay. Have a third question as well?
yeah, but now I forgot it, because now I started thinking about that. Oh, okay, what about the cloud event model? Is that where the sunset header should be?
So about 50 million developers, I think I took it from an article. So there are different standards going on. For example, some people say, okay, who are professional developers? So if you count developers and professional developers, they're like different counts in the word.
Yeah.
So maybe you're talking about the article where you read or learned was more talking about professional developers. And
Oh,
there's
it's
some-
even fewer according to Evans data when it's professional. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
not a lot.
I don't have internet right now, but I will send you the link of article.
No, it's just in because that's good news. If it is
Yeah.
50 million, like
Yeah, so
maybe it's a lot of people that
Yeah.
retrained during COVID, and I mean it should grow because it's so fun to
The,
code.
the number hasn't shot up, but I believe the number was 26 or so million professional developers and another 25 sort of developers that they don't count as professional developers. So it's 50 million of total sort of industry people who are coding actually.
Joyce, what about you? The
Yeah.
20 million.
Yeah, you would have a better.
So Postman has 20 million developers, meaning they're using APIs, they're consuming them, or like whatever. Do they have developer title? Not all of them do. Sometimes they're SDET, sometimes they're tech writers. Like, there's lots of people interacting with APIs. Our CEO has publicly announced that our goal is 100 million.
So,
So,
so the world has to catch up to that.
Low code, no code, like is gonna be a huge level.
Well, you're targeting 100 million users, right? So that would be
Well, people
tech writers and
People
all kinds of
consuming
people.
APIs.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so
Consuming
that-
or working with API?
Oh,
Okay, yeah. So creating also, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So I found this from Stack Overflow, insights.stack Overflow, and 50 million was according to a survey of 2018.
So if something happened during COVID, we'll have to revisit the numbers.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you to both our speakers. There's an announcement from Postman as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
so.
just for
quick-
people joining online,
Yeah.
maybe you want to come in, Joyce.
Thanks, Samir. Hi, people online. Thank you all for coming to the Postman office and like hanging out with API people. So since you guys are here, that means you're not afraid of in-person events and you like tech. So I'm gonna give a shout out for 2 events coming up next month. June 22nd, right here, Postman will be having a meetup. It's gonna be Postman is one of the speakers, Stripe is one of the speakers, and Typeform. And we'll actually be fiddling with some low code, no code new stuff happening in Postman. And then June 23rd, also in San Francisco, but not here, is gonna be a paid workshop. So if you're working with Open API or API designer specifications and all that kind of stuff, it's an API first full day workshop. So that's my 2 plugs.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining in. There's still a lot of food and drinks available, so let's devour the food before it gets even more cold. Thank you everybody. Bye.